Hello and welcome. Please take a seat, get cozy and enjoy a cup of terror with me, Stephanie Valentine. Hello my spooky little pumpkins, thank you for coming back to join me once more. If this is your first time here, welcome. Thank you for being here. A Cup of Terror is a series of videos where I talk about true crime cases that have a dash of the strange. Be that supernatural or to do with the occult or just something downright odd. Now, as you can see, we've got a little bit of a different setup today. Everything's just gotten a bit chaotic here. So this is a temporary setup until I can get back to my my usual set. So yes, it's all rather strange, but oh well, we're still doing it. I miss my candles. I miss my tea. Oh well. Now today's video is also a little bit different because it's not actually a true crime case, it's more of a mystery, but I thought it fit the overall weird and interesting vibe, and it's kind of a two-parter, so I'll talk about the second part later on. Now the story today takes place at Glamis Castle, which is quite a famous castle in Angus, Scotland. It's where Macbeth lives in Shakespeare's play, although the real Macbeth had no connection to the place. It's belonged to the Lion family since the 14th century, and it's witnessed quite a lot of significant historical events. It is also dripping with tales of ghosts, monsters and murder. Now we're going to talk about one of the legends attached to this castle, one of the most famous legend, I suppose. Now it centres around Thomas Beaulion, who was born on the 21st of October 1821 at Glamis Castle. Now he was the first child of Thomas, Lord Glamis, and his wife Charlotte Beaulion. His parents were actually the great-grandparents of the late Queen Mother, who grew up at Glamis Castle. She was a Beaulion. And just to mention it now before it gets super confusing. So Thomas, the father, he didn't end up inheriting the earldom, so he didn't become an earl because he died before his father did. He's also called Thomas. And therefore his eldest surviving son, another Thomas, he inherited the title. So whenever I talk about the earl, I'm talking about the brother, essentially, the brother of Thomas, who the legend talks of. So confusing, I know. I'm really sorry. I hope that made sense. It's just too many Thomases. Now, the official records state that Thomas died the very same day that he was born. But rumours started swirling regarding Thomas Beaulion. It was a rather awful secret that was circulating all throughout the UK, Europe, and even made it over to North America from around the 1840s until the early 1900s. So, what was this secret, this mystery that the Victorians loved to gossip about? It was the Monster of Glamis. The heir to the title, Thomas, was supposedly so deformed, so hideous when he was born that the family cruelly kept him locked away in a secret chamber in the castle. A monster had been born into the family. It was impossible to allow this deformed caricature of humanity to be seen, even by their friends. These are not my words, by the way. This is what was written about him. So whenever I mention his looks, his appearance, I am purely reporting what had been written about him. Personally, I think they were very cruel. Whenever they talked about what he looked like, it's all very sad. So, how did this rumour come about? The rumours started circulating in the villages near Glamis Castle, and it was probably down to an unnamed midwife who claimed that Thomas had actually survived the birth. She claimed that the child, yes, he was deformed, but he was in good health, and she was very confused when they announced his death a day or two later. There was also no known gravestone for the baby, which really fueled the rumours further. In those days, though, there was a lot of infant mortality. It was a very high level, so it wasn't unusual for a child to not have a gravestone. And as you know, rumours and stories have a way of growing and being embellished over time. You know, people can't stop themselves from gossiping, exaggerating the details, adding to it. So this is probably how we've ended up with this legend. Sir Walter Scott, the famous Scottish novelist and poet, he actually stayed in the castle one night. I read that in 1790 he requested to stay over. I don't know the exact date that he did. I don't know if it was soon after or a little bit later, but it wasn't until 1830 that he wrote about his eerie experience that he had. He heard door after door shut, and he began to consider himself as too far from the living and somewhat too near to the dead. Very spooky. And he also referred to the secret chamber, but he didn't say anything about a monster being kept locked up in the room. Although I suppose family aren't stupid. If you've got someone staying over and they're poking around, you'd probably hide them somewhere else until your visitors have gone. This is if the legend is true, obviously. By the mid-19th century, it became quite a remarkable and sensational tale. Everyone was talking about this mysterious person locked away for his entire life in the castle. Victorian storytellers would often share this story. You know the Victorians, they loved a Gothic mystery. It really captured the imagination of people at the time. Now, there were a few variations in what Thomas supposedly looked like. One report said that his body was hideously twisted. One writer believed that Thomas had wasted arms and legs and resembled an enormous flabby egg, which is mean. There were even people who believed that, okay, this one's very silly, half man, half frog. Yeah, I don't quite know where that came from. The most detailed description came from James Wentworth Day, who was a writer who was writing about the history of the Bowes-Lyon family. He spent time with the family and he heard about the legend from the then Earl and his relatives. It said that Thomas's chest was an enormous barrel, hairy as a doormat. His head ran straight into his shoulders, and his arms and legs were toy-like. But the family was so kind, allowing him to live. He was kept safe and occasionally exercised, and he was looked after by the factor, the person who was looking after the castle for the family. So I suppose he was kind of like his caretaker. I mean, this family, they're like a whole bunch of saints, aren't they? You know, they've allowed him to live, even though he looked so hideous. You know, being locked away your whole life is such a great life to have, huh? And and many people think that the reason that he was born like that was because his parents were cousins once removed. So not first cousins, but still a close enough link. And I mean, God knows how related his grandparents were, his great-grandparents, and so on. I mean, the aristocracy, rather inbred. I think that's quite a well-known fact. So the moral of the story, folks, don't marry your relatives, okay? Now, it's alleged that only 3 people at any time were said to know the secret. The Earl, his heir, and the factor, the caretaker estate manager. There was an incident described that took place in 1850. Apparently the Earl's wife, Charlotte, so she was technically the sister-in-law of Thomas. She obviously wasn't privy to any of the juicy details, and she really wanted to know what was going on. So when her husband was away, she asked her guests to help her nose about the castle. So they discussed a plan of action, and they came to the conclusion that the room probably had a window. So they waited until all of the staff had gone away, and off they went. One of the guests had the genius idea of opening each window of every room they searched, and to hang a sheet or a hanky, something like that, out of the window, and that way they'd be able to see which rooms had been searched. Unfortunately, the Earl came back a little sooner than she expected, and he was pissed, so annoyed that she'd do something like that. Apparently it was such a terrible thing that she did that he divorced her, and the Countess lived out the rest of her life in Italy. And to be honest, I probably wouldn't be able to resist having a poke about. I mean, a secret like that, it would kill me not to know. I know I'm probably a bit too nosy. I mean, I would try and respect my husband's privacy, but I reckon a mystery like that would just be too much for me. So I'd totally do the same thing. That was such a good idea though, like hanging something out of the window so that you'd know that the room had been checked. Now, the results aren't conclusive, sadly. Some say that there was one tightly locked window in the tower that didn't have a sheet or anything like that hanging off it. Others say that there were 4 windows. Apparently, it said that many countesses, the wives of the earls, they were very annoyed that they were not allowed to know the details of the secret. There is another story from around 1865 which talks of a workman who one day stumbled across a door that opened into a long passage. The man, he had a little look around and he saw something. He couldn't quite describe what it was, and it was at the far end of the corridor. When the Earl found out about this, he persuaded this guy to emigrate to Australia. And when I say persuaded, I mean forced, basically. It is said that this secret was passed down through the family. The heir of the 13th Earl, he refused to be initiated into the secret. He refused to know anything about it because he'd seen how sad and depressed his father had become, and he just thought, nah, I don't fancy that, thanks. And according to a periodical at the time, the Victorians would get really excited because each heir would talk about how when they inherit the title, they'd promise to tell the whole world a secret, they'd expose the whole thing, and then it never happened. Apparently, each time the Earl or the heir was told the secret, a profound change would come over them, and they'd become quite sad and unsettled. So that's quite interesting. There came a point where the secret just ceased to exist and was no longer passed down. Maybe because the monster had died and there was no need to keep the secret anymore. We don't know. Obviously, we don't have any idea when the death may have occurred. His rooms were said to have been bricked up after his death. I'm assuming not with the body in there, but afterwards the ghost of Thomas was said to haunt the castle and the grounds. So, was the Monster of Glamis even real? I mean, it's a rather sensational story. It seems too crazy to be true, but I don't know. The aristocracy, they're a bit odd, to put it politely. and the secrets that they have. I mean, it's not too outlandish that this may have been a real event, you know. The 13th Earl, Claude, who was another of Thomas's brothers, he made a rather cryptic comment one time, saying, if you could even guess the nature of this castle's secret, you would get down on your knees and thank God it was not yours. But you see, that just makes me want to know even more. Tell me your secret. I need to know. Apparently there is another version of the legend that tells of how in every generation of the family, a vampire child is born and then it's walled up in that room. Oh my gosh, can you imagine if that was true? I mean, that's a bit more far-fetched, I suppose. But like I said, posh people have got some right weird secrets. They get up to some interesting shenanigans, so you never know. But you know, another thing to think about is that the family, they dealt with certain members of the family in really horrible ways. And you know, we're talking about people who they considered to not fit the correct standard, shall we say, people who had something wrong with them in their eyes. So for example, Catherine and Nerissa Beaulion, who are both cousins of the current Queen Elizabeth, they were born mentally disabled. They spent their lives being locked away in mental hospitals, being ignored by their family. So if Thomas really did continue to live, you can imagine that they'd have no problem dishing out such a cruel fate to someone who might have been born less than perfect in their eyes. The whole affair with Catherine and Nerissa is awful, by the way. Really interesting if you want to look into that further. There's a lot about it. So Glamis Castle has had quite a few murders and subsequent hauntings attached to it. I've decided that I'm going to do a second video on Glamis Castle because I wanted this one just to be about Thomas. Also, I thought it would make the video really long if I did both parts, but it probably actually isn't going to be that long. But I've committed to the 2 separate videos, so that's what we're going to do. So look out for that probably in a week or 2's time, hopefully. So that is the legend, the folklore of the Monster of Glamis. We will probably never discover whether it was real or not. What do you guys think though? Do you think Thomas survived but was confined to a locked room in the castle? Or was this simply a case of the aristocracy trolling us, essentially? The secret could have been that there was no secret and it was just all fun and games for them. Whether he lived or not, it's obviously a very sad story. You know, if he did indeed die on the same day as his birth, you know, that's very sad. But if he did survive and was locked away his whole life, oh, that's just very sad as well. It's not the kind of life you'd wish on anyone. Regardless, Glamis Castle will always be linked to a dark secret. So thank you for hanging out with me today. Quite a mystery, this one. I know a little bit different to the other kind of stories I've told. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and join me next time for another cup of terror.